The register beeped at 5:47 in the morning, and Margaret Calloway didn't look up. She never looked up. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, 2 cans of sardines, and a bag of coffee. The fishermen came through before the sun touched the water, their boots still wet, their hands rough enough to scratch glass. Maggie scanned each item with the kind of efficiency that takes years to grow, the kind that says, "I have been here so long I have become part of the furniture." She handed back change without counting it aloud. She knew the amounts by feel. Harrow's Cove had 2 kinds of people. The ones who lived below the ridge, the cashiers, the dock workers, the women who cleaned vacation rentals for $12 an hour, and the ones who lived above it. The bluff people. Old money pressed into stone mansions overlooking the Atlantic, their windows catching light the rest of the town never quite reached. Nobody said the word class out loud in Harrow's Cove. They didn't have to. The cliff road said it for them. "You're doing it again," said Linda. Maggie didn't pause. "Doing what?" "That thing." Linda leaned against the neighboring register, arms crossed, red hair pinned up unevenly. "The invisible thing, where you just disappear into the job." "I'm scanning groceries, Linda." "You're scanning groceries like you're trying to become one." Maggie smiled. It was the small smile she kept for moments like this. Not cold, not warm, just present. The kind of smile that answered questions without giving anything away. Linda meant well. Linda always meant well. She had been trying to set Maggie up with someone for 3 years running, and had so far been refused so gently that she somehow kept trying. "My sister's neighbor," Linda said, lowering her voice as if the sardine display might be listening. "Divorced, very stable. He teaches swimming lessons on the weekend. No thank you." "Maggie, you've been here 15 years. You work the dawn shift. You walk home along the seawall. You never drive up the cliff road. You never come to the Friday thing at Paulie's. I don't drink. You could drink water and be social." Maggie handed the next customer his receipt and said nothing. It was a practiced nothing. Comfortable, unapologetic, and complete. Above the deli counter, the wall-mounted television cycled through local news with the sound turned low. Maggie didn't watch it. She hadn't watched television deliberately in a very long time. But she heard the name before she saw the face, because the name was the kind that carried weight even at low volume. Edmund Harrington, reclusive owner of Harrington Coastal Bank, has once again made headlines this morning, following the resignation of his 4th private caregiver in under 30 days. Maggie's hand stopped on the scanner, just for a heartbeat. The milk carton sat under her palm, unscanned. Sources close to the estate describe working conditions as, quote, "impossible." Local advocates have called Harrington, who has been wheelchair-bound for 8 years following a serious automobile accident, the most hated man on the bluff. The bank declined to comment. She looked up at the screen. The news footage was brief. A black car pulling through iron gates, and for just a moment, through the passenger window, a profile. Gray at the temples, jaw set like a locked door, older than she remembered. Harder than she had allowed herself to imagine on the nights when she imagined him at all. She looked away. She finished scanning the milk. "That guy," Linda said, nodding toward the screen. "Can you imagine? 4 caregivers in a month. 4. My cousin did 1 shift up there 2 years ago and said she'd rather work for free at a hospital." "People get difficult when they're in pain," Maggie said quietly. "Some people get difficult. That man gets impossible." Linda shook her head. "Money doesn't make it better either. Probably makes it worse." Maggie said nothing. She finished her shift at 7:15 and walked home the long way, along the seawall. The Atlantic was the color of iron that morning, the waves low and restless. She kept her hands in her pockets. She didn't look toward the bluff. She had a rule about that. The cottage was small and deliberately bare. White walls, a single shelf of books, a kettle, a bed. The kind of place that held no photographs. She locked the door behind her, crouched beside the bed, and slid out the flat wooden box she kept there. It had a combinations lock. She turned the dial by memory, opened it, and looked inside without touching anything.
A leather diary, dark brown, the cover soft with age. The strap that held it closed had been refastened so many times it was beginning to fray. She closed the box, slid it back under the bed, stood up, put the kettle on. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She stood very still for one full breath. Then she picked up. Miss Calloway? The voice was clipped. Professional. The kind of voice that had never waited in a line. This is Harrington Estate. We understand you're registered with Coastal Care Agency. We need someone tonight. It's not optional. Maggie closed her eyes. Outside, the Atlantic pushed against the seawall. The kettle began to hiss. I know, she said, and her voice was very quiet and very steady and sounded like someone who had been waiting a very long time for the wrong thing to finally arrive. The drive to the Harrington estate took 12 minutes. Maggie knew because she had counted every one of them 8 years ago, sitting in a hospital waiting room, reading about Edmund's accident in a newspaper someone had left on a plastic chair. 12 minutes from the center of Harrow's Cove to the cliff road.
She had memorized the distance the way you memorize the dimensions of a room you are never supposed to enter again. She parked at the service gate and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The mansion rose above her in the dusk, all pale stone and dark glass, the Atlantic black behind it, the sky the color of a bruise healing at the edges. It was larger than she remembered, or maybe she was smaller now. She got out. She got her bag. She walked to the door. A woman opened it before she could knock. 60s, steel gray hair pulled tight, an expression that suggested she had seen every kind of disaster and filed them all alphabetically. Miss Calloway. Not a question. I'm Mrs. Pruitt. I manage the household. Come in quickly, please. The wind off the water gets into the rugs. The entrance hall was all dark wood and silence. Maggie followed Mrs. Pruitt down a corridor that smelled of beeswax and old books, and the housekeeper talked without turning around, in the practiced whisper of a woman who knew which walls were thin. He sleeps badly. 2-3 hours at most. He eats very little. You won't win that argument, so don't try. He reads constantly, mostly history. Some philosophy. Nothing cheerful. She paused. He has a gift, she said carefully, for finding the exact word that makes a person feel worthless. I want you to know that before you go in. I appreciate that, Maggie said. Don't take it personally. Mrs. Pruitt slowed at a closed door at the end of the hall. He takes it personally enough for everyone. Maggie nodded. She had spent 15 years learning not to take things personally. She was very good at it by now. Mrs. Pruitt knocked once, opened the door and stepped aside. Maggie went in. The study was large and cold and smelled of salt air and paper. One entire wall was glass, facing the Atlantic. The wheelchair was angled toward that window, and the man in it had his back to her. Broad shoulders in a dark sweater, silver hair, one hand resting on the armrest with the deliberate stillness of someone who has learned to control what he can reach. He did not turn around. The agency, he said, sent me a cashier. His voice was low and even and contained a kind of boredom that had sharpened itself into something dangerous. A cashier. Do they think managing a register and managing a paralyzed man require the same skill set? Maggie set down her bag. She let one beat of silence pass. Just one? You'd be surprised, she said, what you learn about people from what they put on a conveyor belt. The shoulders shifted. Not much, just enough. She watched him process that. She watched him decide whether to be amused or annoyed. She had seen that calculation happen on a face she had once known better than her own. He chose neither. He turned, and for the first time in 26 years, Edmund Harrington looked at Eleanor Voss. He saw a woman of 44, plain-faced, tired-eyed, with dark-framed glasses and hair cut short and practical and threaded through with gray. He saw someone who had been worn smooth by ordinary life the way a stone gets worn smooth by water, not diminished exactly, just simplified, essential. He saw a stranger. You're overqualified for sentiment, he said, and underqualified for medicine. I want you gone by morning. Of course, Maggie said pleasantly. She picked up his empty tea tray from the side table. I'll make you something to drink before I go. Chamomile or something stronger. He opened his mouth. He closed it. Chamomile, he said, as if the word surprised him on the way out. She walked through the door to the kitchen. Edmund Harrington stared at the space where she had been. He was still staring when Mrs. Pruitt appeared 9 minutes later with a question about the morning schedule. She stopped in the doorway. She had worked for this man for 6 years, and she knew all the shapes his face could make. This was not one of them. Mr. Harrington, she said it carefully, is something wrong? A long pause. The wind moved against the glass. She smells like the sea in October, he said, very quietly, as if he were reporting something from a great distance. My mother used to say that's what Harrow's Cove smelled like before they built the boardwalk. Mrs. Pruitt waited. Edmund shook his head slowly. Never mind, he said, it's nothing. But his hand had closed around the armrest, and his knuckles had gone white. And when Maggie came back through the door with the tea, he watched her set it down with the focused, puzzled attention of a man trying to remember a word in a language he was certain he had forgotten. She set the tea down without a word. Edmund watched the cup. He did not reach for it immediately. That was new. The days had found their shape by then, not comfort exactly. Edmund would not have permitted comfort, but a kind of working order, the way a river finds its course around a stone. Maggie arrived before 7. Medications at 7:15. With water, not juice. Because she had read his chart and noticed the grapefruit interaction no one else had caught. Breakfast at 8. She did not ask what he wanted. She asked what he could manage. There was a difference, and Edmund noticed it and said nothing. He tested her the way a man tests ice. That accent, he said one morning, watching her fold a newspaper. Where is that from exactly? Somewhere flat. Somewhere that doesn't believe in consonants. Ohio, originally, she said, though I've lived in enough places since that it probably sounds like nowhere. It sounds like a bus station. Most accents do, she said pleasantly, if you listen for the wrong thing. He blinked. She turned a page. He tried again that afternoon when she brought in fresh towels, and he looked at her shoes, sensible, worn, the kind that have seen thousands of floors. Do you own anything that wasn't purchased at a discount? He asked. I own a coat that cost more than it should have, she said. I bought it because it was warm and I was cold, and sometimes that's all a decision needs to be. He had no answer for that. He pretended he hadn't heard. The evenings were the strangest part. Edmund read history in the evenings, thick, serious books with cracked spines that suggested he had read them before. His eyes tired faster than he admitted to anyone, and so he read aloud, not to Maggie, never to Maggie, but in a voice meant for the room, for the walls, for whatever audience a proud man invents when he needs one. Maggie sat across the room, mending something or simply still. One evening he was reading about the Crimean War, a chapter on the logistics of the campaign, the supply lines, the catastrophic failures of 1943. And he said the date with total confidence and kept going. 1854, Maggie said quietly. Edmund stopped. He looked at her. The campaign, she said. You said 1943. It was 1854. A long pause. I was testing you, he said. Of course you were, she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked back at his book. Then, very quietly, he continued reading. From the corrected year. The phone call came on a Thursday evening. Edmund's entire body changed the moment he saw the name on the screen. His jaw set. His shoulders pulled back in the particular way of someone bracing for something they have been bracing for on and off for years. He took the call in his study with the door open because he never closed doors. He had told Maggie this on her first day, and she understood without being told why. A man in a wheelchair in a closed room is a man who can be forgotten. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. She heard the silences, the long ones, where Edmund said nothing and his knuckles went white on the armrest. She heard the single flat I see that men use when they mean the opposite. When he came back, he didn't speak for 2 hours. She brought him coffee. She sat nearby, She did not ask. Eventually, he said it. My father thinks I should sell the bank and move to a facility. He's been thinking this for 8 years. Maggie held her cup. And what do you think? He looked at her, not through her the way he usually did, at her. I think, he said slowly, that some people spend their whole lives deciding what other people should disappear into. The room held the sentence for a moment. Yes, Maggie said. They do. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. And Edmund, who had been bracing for pity or argument or the careful therapeutic nodding of people paid to absorb him, found himself looking at this woman, her plain coat, her Ohio nowhere accent, her unimpressible eyes salaha, and feeling something shift, faintly, somewhere beneath the armor. He did not name it. He went to bed at 10. She heard his door. By midnight the house was quiet. By 2 it was quieter still. And at some point in that corridor, between 2 and 3, Maggie went to her bag. The worn canvas bag she brought each day and never left without, and she took out the diary. It was leather, old. The kind of leather that goes soft with years and handling, that holds the shape of the hands that held it. She carried it to the armchair beside Edmund's bookshelf, and she sat down with it pressed against her chest, not reading yet, just holding it, the way you hold something you have not decided whether to open or let go. She opened it. She read. At some point, without meaning to, she slept. The diary stayed against her chest, rising and falling, rising and falling. At 3 in the morning, a wheel turned in the hallway. Edmund appeared in the doorway. He stopped. And the face that had not softened in 8 years, the face that Mrs. Pruitt had described to her sister as a door that no longer had a handle, went very, very still. He saw the diary. He saw the name of the woman sleeping in his chair. And then, slowly, he looked at the cover, at the faded letters pressed into the old leather. His hand came up, slowly. The way a man reaches for something he is not sure is real. He moved closer, not fast. The wheelchair made almost no sound on the floor. He had learned years ago how to move through a sleeping house without waking it. He stopped beside the armchair. He looked at her face first, and something happened to his expression that no one on his staff would have recognized. The contempt was gone, the cold management of it, the practiced way he had of making people feel like furniture. All of it drained out of him in a matter of seconds. What replaced it was older than contempt, older than anger. It was the face of a man standing at the edge of something he could not name, hearing a song he had forgotten and could not quite place. He looked at the diary. He reached for it, slowly, with the careful hand of a man taking something from an altar. Maggie did not wake. He opened the cover. He read the name written there in a handwriting he had not seen in 26 years. Eleanor Voss. His hand went still. Not a tremor, not a flinch. Just still. The absolute stillness of a man whose mind has stopped moving. He read the first page, then the second. He read until the lines blurred, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and held it there. He read until the sky outside the tall windows turned from black to the color of old pewter. He read until his shoulders were those rigid, furious shoulders or dropped just slightly, the way shoulders drop when a person finally puts down something they have been carrying alone for too long. He was still reading when Maggie stirred. She made a small sound, the kind of sound that comes before consciousness, before the body remembers what it is waking up to. Her head moved against the wing of the chair. Her hand reached for the diary out of pure habit. Found nothing. Her eyes opened. She saw Edmund. She saw what was in his hands. The blood left her face so completely and so fast that in the gray pre-dawn light she looked like a photograph of herself. Not a person, a record of a person. Neither of them spoke. Outside a gull called once and went quiet. Edmund looked up from the diary. He looked at her face. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been trying to remember for the better part of his adult life. He said her name, Eleanor. Not a question. He had no questions about what he was saying. It was a recognition, the kind that does not need confirming. She sat up slowly. She put her feet on the floor. She folded her hands in her lap with a steadiness that must have cost her something enormous. You weren't supposed to find it yet, she said. He said the word back to her, just that one word. Yet. She didn't look away from him. "You were going to leave it," he said. "Yes. And leave." A pause. Outside, the light was coming up in thin strips along the water. "Yes." Edmund looked down at the diary in his hands. He turned it over once. The leather was soft with years of handling, the handling of someone who had opened and closed this thing in the dark, in the quiet, when no one was watching. "You came back to Harrow's Cove," he said, and his voice was very even, very deliberate, the way a man speaks when he is choosing every single word before he lets it go. "You got a job at the supermarket. You waited to be placed here. And your plan was to disappear again." She did not deny it. "How long?" he said. "Were you going to let it take?" "I didn't know," she said. "I wasn't sure they would send me here. I wasn't sure you would keep me." "You're not a nurse." "No." "You knew that." "Yes, but you stayed." "You needed someone," she said. "And I was already here." Edmund was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands, at the diary between them. He opened it again, not to the beginning this time, but to a page near the middle, a page that was more worn than the others, the edge of it soft and grey with use. He began to read aloud. His voice was steady at first. "I left because Walter told me what would happen to Edmund if I stayed." He paused, continued. "I believed him. I have spent 26 years wondering if I was a coward or if I saved him." His voice was not steady now. It was down to something thin and stripped. "I still don't know." He stopped. He took a breath. "But I know what I know about the accident." He looked up at her. His eyes were dark and very still. He looked back at the page. He read the last line. "And I know who was driving the other car." The room was completely silent. Edmund did not move. Maggie, Eleanor, sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched him with an expression that was not fear and was not relief. It was the expression of a woman who has been waiting 26 years to stop carrying something alone, and has just realized she no longer is. Edmund set the diary down on the arm of his wheelchair. He didn't close it, he just set it down. The fire in the grate had burned low. The light coming through the east window was the pale, watery gold of 9 in the morning. Somewhere outside, a gull cried once and fell silent. "Roy Sutter," Edmund said. His voice was careful, flat, the way a man speaks when he is holding something very heavy and doesn't want anyone to see how much it weighs. "You said his name was Roy Sutter." "Yes, he works the old Callaway Road station, has for 40 years. "I know the station." A pause. "I used to stop there on the way back from sailing. He gave me a free coffee once because I looked cold." Maggie nodded. "He's a good man. He's been frightened for 8 years. Your father holds the mortgage on that station. $300,000. Roy is 69. He has nowhere else to go." So he said nothing. He said nothing. She looked at her hands. "But he told me. Last spring, he came into the market where I work and he recognized me. He knew my mother years ago and he pulled me aside in the cereal aisle and he whispered it like a confession." She looked up. "He said he'd seen the car. He said he'd seen the driver. He said the driver had seen him too. And then 3 days later, a man in a suit came to the station and told Roy that his mortgage renewal had been approved. No application, no review, just approved." Roy understood what that meant. Edmund's jaw tightened. Silence. Paid for in advance. "Yes." The fire shifted. A log settled with a soft collapse of ash. Edmund put one hand on the diary. He didn't pick it up. He just rested his fingers on the cover like he was steadying it, or steadying himself. 8 years, he said. Maggie said nothing. 8 years in this chair. His voice didn't rise. That was the thing that frightened her most, how quiet it was. 8 years of surgeries and therapy, and being told the driver was never found, that was probably a tourist, that it was an accident. He stopped. 8 years, and my father has been sitting across from me at Christmas dinner. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into deep water. No splash. Just a slow, terrible descent. Maggie watched him. Edmund, don't. His hand lifted from the diary. Don't say you're sorry. I don't say you should have come sooner. I need a moment. She gave him one. 2. He turned his chair slightly toward the window and looked out at the Atlantic. The water was gray-green this morning, running in long, slow swells toward the rocks. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that has no obligation to make sense of anything and finds that comforting. Then he said quietly, "Why did you come back? Really, not the diary, not the evidence. Why now?" She answered without hesitating, "Because I'm running out of time." She said it simply, without drama. And I decided that when I ran out, I wanted the truth to still be here, even if I wasn't. He turned back toward her. His eyes moved over her face with the focused, careful attention of a man reassembling something broken. "The heart," he said. "Yes. How long have you known?" 14 months. He was quiet for a moment. "And you spent those 14 months building a case against my father instead of resting." "I spent them doing both." She allowed herself a small, dry, almost smile. "I'm a very efficient person. I always have been. You used to tease me about it." Something shifted in his face, just briefly, just for a second. The shadow of something that might, in another life, have been a smile. "You alphabetized my bookshelves," he said. "I thought it was charming." "My mother thought you were deranged." "Your mother was right about most things." She was. His voice softened on that. Then it steadied again. "Eleanor." It was the first time he had said the name aloud. She went very still. "I'm not going to pretend the last 26 years didn't happen," he said. "And I'm not going to pretend this morning hasn't happened. But I need you to understand something." He leaned forward in the chair slightly, his dark eyes steady on hers. "I am not done. Whatever you came here to finish, you're not finishing it alone." Before she could answer, there were 3 brisk knocks at the sitting room door. Mrs. Pruitt entered with a folded note on a small silver tray. Her face was arranged in its usual careful neutrality, but her hands, Maggie noticed, were not entirely steady. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Harrington. A message just came through from the front gate." She held out the tray. "It's from your father's office." Edmund took the note. "Read it." The color didn't leave his face. He wasn't that kind of man. But something behind his eyes went very, very cold. He held the note out toward Maggie. 4 lines. Typed. "Walter Harrington will arrive at 2 o'clock this afternoon. He understands his son has taken on a new caregiver. He looks forward to being introduced to Miss Calloway. He hopes she is well." Maggie read it twice. She looked up. Mrs. Pruitt was already backing toward the door, but she paused. "Should I tell the gate to expect him, sir?" Edmund's voice was perfectly level. "Tell the gate," he said, "to let him in." He arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Not a minute early, not a minute late. That was the kind of man Walter Harrington was. Maggie heard the car first, a long, low sound on the gravel drive. The kind of quiet engine that costs more than most people make in a year. She was standing at the kitchen window. She didn't move away from it. Edmund was already in the sitting room. The front door opened. Mrs. Pruitt murmured something. Then footsteps, slow, measured, unhurried, came down the hall. Walter Harrington was 81 years old. He looked 65. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a dark blue suit that had been pressed with military precision. He carried a cane, polished walnut with a brass tip. He didn't lean on it. He used it the way a conductor uses a baton. For effect. He smiled when he entered the room. Not at Edmund first. At Maggie. "Miss Calloway," he said. A small pause, just a breath too long. "What a pleasure." Maggie held his gaze. "Mr. Harrington." He turned to Edmund then, and the smile stayed, but the texture of it changed, warmer, practiced. "My boy," he said, "you look better than I expected." Edmund said nothing for a moment, then, Sit down, Walter. Walter sat. He set the cane across his knee. He glanced around the room, the books, the windows, the chair Maggie had taken by the far wall, and he nodded slowly, as if approving of a painting he'd already decided to sell. I won't stay long, he said. I know you value your rest. He looked at Maggie again. The agency sent you, did they? You're not a trained nurse. No, Maggie said. I'm not. What did you do before this? Groceries, she said. I scanned groceries. Walter's smile didn't change. That was the frightening thing about it. It was fixed, like something painted on. How resourceful, he said. Edmund's hands tightened on the wheels of his chair, just slightly. Walter turned back to him. I wanted to tell you in person. The board has scheduled a meeting next Thursday. There are some concerns about the structure of oversight, about continuity planning, given your situation. My situation, Edmund repeated. Your health, Edmund. No one is being unkind. This is care. The board wants to ensure the bank is protected while you focus on your recovery. And you arranged this meeting. I facilitated it. There's a difference. Edmund looked at him for a long moment. Is there? It wasn't a question. Walter stood. He smoothed his jacket. He looked at Maggie one last time, and his voice dropped just slightly. Not enough to hide, but enough to land. Take good care of him, Miss Calloway. He's all I have. He left. The room was very quiet after his footsteps faded. Mrs. Pruitt closed the front door, the car on the gravel. Then silence. Edmund turned to Maggie. Tell me, he said. She didn't pretend not to understand. She crossed to the bookshelf. She opened the diary. From the back pocket she withdrew several folded pages, sharp-cornered, dense with small print. Public filings, she said. Board communications. I photographed them 3 weeks ago. She set them on his lap. He has 6 board members. He needs 5 votes. He already has 4. Edmund looked down at the papers. He didn't speak. The plan is to remove you as owner, place you in a private facility, voluntary on paper, give the board the expanded powers. She paused. He's been building it for 2 years. Edmund was still looking at the papers. You knew this, he said quietly. Before I ever read the diary, you knew all of this. Yes. And you were going to leave it here, for me to find after you were gone. She didn't answer. That was its own answer. He looked up. You came back to leave me the truth and disappear. But you didn't disappear. You read the diary before I could. So now what? Maggie was quiet for a moment. Now I have to decide, she said, if I'm still a coward. She walked to the bathroom. She closed the door gently behind her. She stood at the sink for a moment, both hands on the cold porcelain. Then she opened her travel bag. Inside was a small case, the kind that holds medication. She unzipped it, took out a bottle. The label was plain white, black letters. She read it every day, and it still felt like reading someone else's name. Dilti-Azem. Cardiac arrhythmia. She shook one pill into her palm. She swallowed it dry. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. The face that wasn't Eleanor anymore. The face that wasn't quite Maggie either. 6 days, she said. 6 days since he'd read the diary. 6 days since the world had shifted on its axis, and neither of them had found a way to talk about what that meant for tomorrow, or the day after, or any day beyond the immediate work that needed doing. There was a lot of work. Edmund was on the phone before 7 each morning. Maggie could hear his voice through the study door. Low, controlled, precise. Not the voice he used with staff. A different voice. The one she imagined, that had built something before everything broke. She drove to see Roy on the second day. The cliff road was exactly as she remembered it. Narrow, unforgiving. The Atlantic sitting gray and enormous below the guardrail. She kept both hands on the wheel and drove very slowly and didn't let herself look down. Roy Sutter's station sat at the foot of the road where the asphalt widened out into town. He was under a truck when she pulled in. He heard her door and rolled out from underneath, and when he saw her face, he went still. Eleanor, he said. Maggie, she said. for a little longer. He wiped his hands on a cloth. He didn't invite her inside. They sat on a wooden bench by the air pump, with the salt wind coming in off the water. "I know why you're here," he said. "Then I don't have to explain it." "No." He looked at his hands. "I've thought about that morning every single day for 8 years. You want to know if I'll say it out loud?"
"Edmund's attorney can take your statement privately," she said. "And Edmund has authorized me to tell you that the mortgage on this station, whatever remains, will be paid in full, whatever it takes." Roy was quiet for a long time.
"It's not about the money," he said finally. "I know," she said. "It never was." He turned to look at her. Really look. The kind of look that sees past the name change and the years and the carefully constructed ordinary life. "You've been living with something a long time," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have." Another long silence. A truck went past on the road. A gull screamed somewhere above the water. "Walter's driver was behind the wheel," Roy said. "I saw the impact. It wasn't an accident. He hit Edmund's car at the intersection on purpose, then pulled forward and drove off like it was nothing." He swallowed. "The next morning, 2 men came here. They didn't threaten me exactly. They just made it very clear what my silence was worth. Will you give a sworn statement?" He nodded once. Slow, like a man putting down something heavy. "Yeah," he said. "I will." Back at the estate, Mrs. Pruitt was crying quietly at the kitchen table when Maggie came through the door. She wasn't hiding it. She just sat there with a cup of cold tea and her eyes red, watching Edmund through the half-open study door, still on the phone, still building something from whatever pieces he had left. "He hasn't been like this in years," Mrs. Pruitt said. Maggie didn't answer. She made fresh tea and set it beside the old cup and went to sit in the hallway. That evening, Edmund wheeled to the window. He asked her to stay. "If the hearing goes wrong," he said, "if Walter wins the board vote, would you still testify about the accident?" "Yes." "It could trigger. I know what it could trigger." He went very still. "How long have you known about your heart?" She looked at the last light falling across the water below. "Long enough," she said. "Long enough to know I didn't want to waste what's left of it being invisible." He didn't speak again for several minutes. He just looked at her, like Roy had looked at her, like a man trying to understand how someone carries that quietly. Then his phone rang. It was Daniel Marsh. She watched Edmund's face change as he listened, watched the careful stillness he'd built over 3 days crack down the middle. "When?" he said.
A pause. "Tomorrow morning," Daniel said through the speaker. Walter pulled a procedural motion. "The hearing is at 9. And Eleanor, there's an injunction. He's claiming unauthorized presence, unknown motives. A beat. It gets served at 8. 1 hour before the hearing. 1 hour to remove her from the estate before she could walk into that room." Edmund set the phone down on his knee. He looked at her. She looked back. "Well," she said quietly, "I suppose we leave at 7. They left at 7.
The injunction arrived at 8. Maggie signed for it at the door, read it once, folded it, and put it in her coat pocket. "You know it doesn't cover the hearing," she said. "I know," Edmund said. Daniel made sure. She helped him into the car. Neither of them spoke much on the drive. The boardroom was already full when they arrived. Patricia Osei sat at the center. Walter's people filled one side of the long table. 5 of them, faces blank and expensive. Walter himself sat at the head. Of course he did. He had always sat at the head. Edmund wheeled to his place. Daniel Marsh stood at his shoulder, and then Eleanor walked in. Walter's face moved through several expressions very quickly. Surprise, calculation, then the smile. That smooth, practiced smile Edmund had watched his whole life and never understood until now. Patricia Osei nodded once. "We may begin." Eleanor stood. She placed the diary on the table. She placed Roy Sutter's sworn statement beside it. She placed 3 photographs of the board documents, the ones detailing the plan to have Edmund declared mentally incapacitated, in a neat row. Then she spoke. She was calm. Not the calm of someone who feels no fear. The calm of someone who has decided that fear has finished being useful. She spoke for 40 minutes. Her voice was clear, steady. The room stayed quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something true is being said and everyone knows it. Halfway through, Edmund noticed the change. Her voice dropped slightly. The pauses between sentences grew a little longer. He gripped his armrests. He did not stop her. He understood that stopping her would be the one thing she could never forgive him for. Walter's attorney objected 7 times. Patricia Osei overruled every single one with increasing impatience. When Eleanor finished, there was silence. Then Walter stood. "This woman," he said, "is a fraud. Her name is not Calloway. She is a nobody who ran from my son 26 years ago and returned with a manufactured story too. Her name is Eleanor Voss." Edmund's voice came out quiet and total, like a door closing on everything that came before. "She is the woman I was going to marry. She is the reason I am still alive. Because if she had stayed, you would have found another way to destroy us both. And I would never have known who you are." The room was very still. Walter sat down. Eleanor sat down too, carefully. One hand pressed flat against her chest. Patricia Osei said, "We'll take a 15-minute recess." In the hallway, Eleanor stood with her back against the wall. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was wrong. Shallow, slightly too fast. Edmund wheeled to her. He reached up and took her hand. The first time he had ever touched her as himself. As the man who finally knew everything. "Tell me you're all right," he said. She opened her eyes, and she gave him a smile that broke something open in him completely. "I'm not," she said softly. "But I finished." Her knees gave way. The paramedics were already in the building. Edmund had arranged it before the hearing began. He hadn't told Eleanor. He hadn't told anyone except the building's security desk and the lead paramedic, a quiet man named Torres, who asked no questions and took up a position near the side entrance at 8:45 that morning. Edmund had known what the testimony might cost her, and he had let her give it anyway, because she was Eleanor, because taking the choice from her would have been its own kind of cruelty. Torres and his partner reached her in under 4 minutes. Edmund held her hand until they made him let go. The board voted that same afternoon. Patricia Osei read the motion aloud in a room that had gone very still. Walter Harrington removed from the board pending full investigation into the Route 9 accident of 2016 and the fabricated fraud documents from the 1980s. The vote was 7-1. The one was Walter's personal attorney, who had no vote and shouldn't have been in the room, but no one had the energy to ask him to leave. Edmund retained full ownership of Harrington Coastal Bank. A state investigation into the hit and run was opened within 48 hours, based on Roy Sutter's signed statement and the diary. Walter's attorney called Edmund's office the following morning to discuss terms. Edmund's assistant told him Edmund was unavailable. Edmund was, in fact, sitting in a hospital chair beside Eleanor's bed, reading to her from a novel she'd pointed to on the side table. "Something light," she'd said. "Something with no secrets in it." "Does this count?" he asked, holding up the cover. She looked at it. "There's a murder on page 1. No secrets, though." "Read it," she said. He read, "Mrs. Pruitt baked things no one had asked for. A lemon cake on Tuesday. Scones on Wednesday. Something involving blueberries on Thursday that she couldn't quite name and didn't try to. She cried in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. Edmund's driver, Charlie, saw her twice and said nothing and ate a scone. Eleanor was released on a Thursday afternoon. Her cardiologist had adjusted her medication. There was a treatment path, not a cure. He had been honest about that, and she had appreciated his honesty more than she could say. But there was time. And time, he told her, was what you made of it. She walked out through the hospital's front entrance into pale winter light, and she stopped. Edmund was there, but not in his chair. He was standing, both hands gripping a therapy walker, knuckles white, jaw set, upright. He had clearly been standing for some time already, and it had clearly cost him something enormous, and he did not look like a man who cared about the cost at all. Eleanor put her hand over her mouth. He took one step toward her. The walker scraped the pavement. Then another step. "You came back to say goodbye," he said. His voice was rough. "I'm saying hello." She crossed the distance between them. She put her hand over his on the walker's frame. A nurse on the second floor took a photograph on her phone without thinking about it. It ran in the Harrows Cove Gazette the next morning. A man grinning in a hospital driveway like someone who had just remembered what it meant to want to be alive. A woman beside him with her hand pressed to her heart. The cottage by the seawall was small, and it was enough. 2 chairs on the porch, the Atlantic in front of them, doing what it had always done, enormous, indifferent, and somehow, on this particular evening, almost gentle. The leather diary sat on the railing between them. Its work was done. Eleanor's hand was in Edmund's. "I owe you 26 years, he said. She looked at the water. "We have time." He didn't argue, he just held on,